The Case of Robin Doan. This story takes place on a remote farm in a small town called Pampa in Texas, USA. 10-year-old Robin Doan was the daughter of Michelle Conrad. She lived with Michelle, her stepfather, Brian Conrad, and her older brother, Zach. The family owned a farmhouse in the area where Brian successfully managed a farming business. The children were raised in a peaceful rural environment. After divorcing the children's biological father, Michelle met Brian, a kind and pleasant man who quickly formed a strong bond with her children. Life improved for Michelle, and she eventually married Brian. The family had been living happily together for several years. By September 2005, Michelle was 6 months pregnant, and the whole family was eagerly anticipating the arrival of the baby. Brian, in particular, was thrilled at the thought of becoming a father. Meanwhile, Robin, a determined and resourceful 10-year-old, was living the typical life of a schoolgirl. She shared close relationships with her mother, brother, stepfather, and even her biological father, who occasionally visited her. Robin also spent some summers with her biological dad. On the evening of September 30th, 2005, Robin went to bed as usual but was suddenly awakened in the middle of the night. At first, she thought she was trapped in a nightmare when she heard her mother screaming and the explosions. Quickly became clear that this was no dream. Something terrible was happening downstairs. Overcome with fear but driven by curiosity, Robin got out of bed and moved to her bedroom door to listen. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, stopping right outside her room. The door creaked open, and Robin quickly leaped back into her bed, her heart racing. She lay perfectly still, trying to suppress her rising fear. Suddenly, the explosions shattered the silence. 2 bullets narrowly missed her, one passing just inches from her left leg and another near her left arm. The third bullet hit a nearby piece of furniture. In the darkness, the attacker didn't realize they had missed her. They then moved to the next room, where Robin's brother, Zach, was asleep. Moments later, more explosions echoed through the house, followed by a faint, heartbreaking cry from Zach. Then, everything fell eerily silent as the attacker left. Robin was frozen with fear, her body paralyzed. She pretended to be dead, using every ounce of willpower to stay perfectly still, too terrified even to breathe deeply. Terrified that the attacker might return and notice she was alive, she remained in that state of panic for 2.5 hours, unable to process what had just happened. When she finally managed to summon the courage to move, there were no signs of the intruder. Summoning her strength, Robin cautiously got up. She grabbed her phone and called 911, though every step and movement was filled with dread that the assailant might still be nearby. Her voice trembling, Robin identified herself as a scared 10-year-old girl seeking help. Through tears, she told the operator she was cold and frightened. Between sobs, she explained that she had heard her mother screaming and explosions, but had been too afraid to leave her room to check on her family. She feared the worst, knowing hours had passed without any sound or sign of life from her loved ones. Robin eventually went to the kitchen and gazed out the window, anxiously waiting for the police to arrive. As soon as she saw the flashing lights of the patrol cars, she rushed outside to meet the officers. The little girl, visibly shaken and distressed, was escorted to one of the patrol cars for her safety. Meanwhile, several officers prepared to investigate the house, anticipating the possibility that the attacker might still be inside and ready to confront them. Inside the house, the police discovered a horrifying crime scene. The entire family had been brutally murdered. Brian had been shot 3 times, Michelle and even the family dog had been shot twice. Robin's brother, Zach, was killed in his sleep, and one of the bullets struck him directly in the head. Michelle, who was just 2 months away from giving birth, was also tragically killed, and her unborn baby did not survive. Shell casings found at the scene matched a rifle, which was typically purchased through special orders or produced in limited quantities. Throughout this time, Robin remained in the patrol car, waiting for news about her family. She held onto a thin hope that someone had survived. When an officer returned and confirmed that the perpetrator had fled the scene, Robin felt a brief moment of relief. However, the devastating truth about her family's fate was soon revealed to her. Robin began crying again as she fully grasped that her loved ones had been killed. The police informed her that she needed to go to the station to speak with detectives. However, before leaving, Robin asked the officers to help her feed the animals so she could try to calm herself. During this time, she appeared detached from reality. While feeding her goats in the barn, she spoke as though nothing had happened, reminiscing about how she and her brother had won prizes in a competition. But then, she suddenly broke down again, crying as she grabbed one of the officers by the shoulder and desperately asked when her loved ones would come out of the house. The officer had to gently remind her once more that she was the only survivor of the tragedy. Robin was first taken to a nearby medical center for care. Psychologists were assigned to work with her, but this would take time. Doctors examined Robin and confirmed that she was physically unharmed. As a result, the police brought her to the station both to speak with her and to ensure her safety. Meanwhile, detectives understood they were dealing with a dangerous criminal and needed to act quickly to prevent another attack. Robin cooperated with the detectives and provided information to the best of her ability. However, Robin did not witness the events firsthand. Detectives initially suspected that her stepfather or mother might have had a serious conflict with someone shortly before the incident, but this theory was ruled out. Robin denied any such conflicts. Another possibility emerged that someone in her family might have been involved with dangerous individuals or illegal substances, but Robin dismissed this as well. She couldn't think of anyone who might hate her family enough to attack them with a weapon. Although she described what she heard in great detail, she couldn't identify the attacker. She hadn't gotten a clear look, only catching a glimpse of a dark silhouette. As a result, she was unable to provide any useful description. The only thing she was certain of was that the attacker had light skin. One critical piece of information did stand out. Robin distinctly remembered hearing 15 gunshots and confidently reported this number. She later revised her statement slightly, noting that there were clearly more than 10 gunshots. When the crime scene was examined, investigators found shell casings confirming that exactly 15 shots had been fired. It seemed surprising that a 10-year-old girl, especially under such terrifying circumstances, could recall this detail so accurately. The situation remained unclear. No motive for the attack had been established, nor had the perpetrator's intentions. It was possible the attacker wanted to eliminate everyone in the household and leave no loose ends. There was even a risk that they might return to target Robin, the sole witness, to complete their plan. For Robin's safety, she was placed in a specialized center for victims of violence. There, Robin was under the care of her biological father, stepmother, and stepsister, with police officers also stationed at the facility. Now, her father was the only person able to support and help her. He arrived in the middle of the night to pick Robin up, and after her interrogation was completed, they were immediately escorted to the center. Robin was informed that these precautions were necessary for her protection, and she was not allowed to leave the facility. She understood this as she herself feared another attack. Despite the restriction on leaving, Robin had to attend her family's funeral. She was allowed to go, but only under police escort. The funeral drew a large crowd from the nearby town, as many people knew the family and spoke about them fondly. In this small, agricultural town in Texas, everyone was deeply saddened by the tragedy. For Robin and the mourners, the sight of the 3 coffins at the memorial was unbearable. No one could have imagined that these kind people could die so tragically. Detectives saw the funeral as an opportunity. The time and location of the service were not kept secret. In fact, the police hoped the attacker might show up. If the perpetrator planned to strike again, the funeral would have been the perfect moment. Law enforcement was fully prepared to act, closely monitoring the crowd while keeping a watchful eye on Robin, who was accompanied by her father, stepmother, and stepsister. But the event passed without any suspicious activity. By this point, forensic experts had finished examining the crime scene. They uncovered evidence that might assist in identifying the perpetrator, but no solid leads pointed directly to the murderer. Still, the findings were notable. Inside the house, they found shoe prints, and outside near the house, they discovered tire tracks. The experts collected all the prints and carefully analyzed the tire tread patterns. Unfortunately, No fingerprints or DNA belonging to the attacker were recovered. The lack of fingerprints led investigators to believe the attacker had worn gloves. The only blood found at the scene was that of the victims, suggesting the perpetrator was uninjured. It seemed the family was caught off guard and had no opportunity to resist or fight back. The back door of the house had been forced open, indicating a break-in. However, despite the presence of valuable items, including a wallet with cash, nothing was stolen from the home. Detectives determined that robbery was not the motive behind the attack. The assailant's behavior didn't match that of someone acting impulsively or under the influence of banned substances or alcohol. Instead, the killer acted with intention and precision, methodically eliminating the family members one by one. The police thoroughly investigated Brian, Michelle, and Zach but found nothing suspicious. No one had a motive, and everyone appeared to be kind, peaceful, and conflict-averse. Robin's biological father had been with his family in a nearby town, and his wife confirmed he was home asleep that night. Eventually, all leads came to a standstill, as no one in the family circle seemed to fit the profile of a suspect. However, such a violent act targeting both adults and children suggested the possibility of a strong motive, such as jealousy, revenge, or resentment. The day before Robin's family was murdered, in the small town of Pineville, Missouri, relatives of the McCool family had attempted to contact them without success. By evening, worried relatives had arrived at the McCool family home. To their shock, the house was empty and surrounded by police tape. A neighbor informed them that a terrible crime had occurred. The night before, Orly McCool and Don McCool were killed by an unidentified attacker. At that time, forensic investigators were still processing the scene. They also questioned the relatives who arrived, but no one could provide any helpful information about a possible suspect. Inside the house, investigators found some unusual shell casings of an uncommon caliber, rare and difficult to obtain in the U.S. The following day, another incident in the same area provided a key lead. A local resident, Mr. King, returned to his home after being away for several days on a work trip. He discovered that his house had been broken into. His weapon safes had been forced open and emptied. Among the stolen items was a rare firearm in the U.S., along with ammunition. This strongly suggested a connection between the burglary and the murder of the McCool family. The assailant had likely stolen the weapon from King before committing the crime. Mr. King was thoroughly investigated, but he had a solid alibi. He was out of town at the time of the attack. However, several members of his family could have had access to the weapon. Among them, one person stood out, Levi King, the son of Mr. King. Levi was on the run, and family members suspected he was connected to the McCool murders. Thanks to Mr. King's report, detectives had a photo of the suspected killer. At just 20 years old, Levi was already well known to authorities due to his criminal history, which included serving time for burglary. A few years earlier, Levi had broken into a neighbor's house, stolen valuables, and set the property on fire. For this crime, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Just weeks earlier, Levi had been scheduled for transfer to another correctional facility. Desperate for freedom, he escaped during the transfer. Authorities in Missouri were certain Levi was extremely dangerous, armed, and ready to use his weapons at any time. Citizens were alerted through the media, and people were advised not to approach Levi if they encountered him, but to immediately contact law enforcement. Meanwhile, relatives of the McCool family reported several items stolen, including their Dodge Dakota pickup truck. The truck's details were entered into a police database, and a warrant was issued for Levi King's arrest in connection with the crime at the McCool residence. Although Levi King did not know any of the victims personally, he was on the run and needed resources, particularly a vehicle, to leave the state. Eventually, a suspicious young man was stopped by Border Patrol in El Paso, Texas, near the Mexican border, likely attempting to flee the country. During the stop, the young man calmly admitted to having a weapon in his trunk. This led to a more detailed search. During the investigation, they discovered that the pickup truck he was driving was the McCool family's stolen vehicle. Levi was taken to the police station for further investigation. Law enforcement officers decided to question Levi further, and from the start, his behavior seemed odd. Within just 15 minutes of talking to detectives, Levi confessed to the double murder of Orly and Dawn McCool. Levi admitted he couldn't explain why he committed the murders. He said he broke into a random house on the outskirts of town to steal a car, driven only by an overwhelming and uncontrollable desire to kill. When Levi entered the house, he was unexpectedly noticed. A door opened, and a woman appeared, politely asking what he wanted. Levi claimed he was startled and panicked, so he grabbed his weapon and attacked her. Hearing the noise, a man came to investigate, and Levi, paralyzed by fear, also attacked him. After the killings, Levi fled in the pickup truck. Levi was soon extradited to Missouri, where local law enforcement questioned him further. During the interrogation, Levi once again confessed to the murders. Levi made an even more shocking confession. He admitted to murdering the Robin family in Texas. His confession matched evidence from the crime scene of the Robin family's triple murder, including matching shell casings found at both crime scenes. Levi described how he had attacked defenseless members of the Robin family and, upon hearing noises upstairs, discovered others in the house. Among them was Robin, who awoke to the explosions. Driven by uncontrollable bloodlust, the killer showed no regard for the victims' ages. Levi went upstairs, entered the bedrooms, and attacked the occupants in their beds to eliminate any witnesses. After committing these horrific acts, Levi fled the scene. After Levi confessed to the crimes, the police quickly contacted their colleagues in Texas to verify the details he had provided. Once again, his account aligned with the evidence. With this confirmation, Robin was finally able to feel some relief. She had been under immense stress for days, unable to sleep. The next day, investigators from Texas arrived to take Levi into custody. During the transfer, showing no remorse, Levi openly described his emotional state before, during, and after the murders. He admitted that the feelings he experienced during the murders were more intense and pleasurable than any banned substance. Even hours after committing the killings, he claimed he could still smell gunpowder, which gave him a sense of euphoria. In a formal video-recorded statement, he detailed his actions, starting with the murder of the McCool family. Levi explained that his urge to kill coincided with his need for a vehicle to escape toward the Mexican border. Along the way, he felt another uncontrollable desire to kill and randomly chose the isolated home of the Robin family as his next target. Levi admitted that he did not know any of his victims, including the McCools or the Robins. Realizing the severity of his crimes, he understood he was now facing the death penalty. In an attempt to avoid this, he fled toward Mexico, hoping to disappear. In Missouri, Levi was charged with the double murder of the McCool family. Following his lawyer's advice, he accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. At the same time, hearings for the triple murder and attempted murder in Texas began. Unlike in Missouri, Texas prosecutors took a firmer stance, refusing to rule out the death penalty or consider any plea agreements from the defense. The prosecutor was confident in securing a conviction that would ensure Levi could no longer pose a threat to society. However, death penalty cases often involve lengthy trials and require extensive preparation. Levi spent several years in jail without bail while awaiting trial in Texas. By the time the trial began, Robin, the sole survivor of the Texas attack, was over 14 years old. The hearings took place just before her birthday. On the eve of her 15th birthday, Robin was furious as she realized how senseless and brutal Levi's attack on her family had been. He had no motive and acted purely out of a desire to kill. Understandably, she strongly advocated for him to receive the death penalty. However, Levi's lawyer fought to save his client from execution. Opinions were divided. Some believed Levi did not deserve to live, while others argued that life imprisonment without parole was a harsher and more fitting punishment for his crimes. The defense attorney sought to present Levi King as a more sympathetic figure to influence the jury's decision. He emphasized that Levi had struggled with bipolar disorder since adolescence. Over the years, he had also been diagnosed with depression, psychosis, and schizophrenia. Levi was one of 7 children in a family where he reportedly received little to no love or care. His antisocial behavior was linked to an abusive, alcoholic father and a neglectful, indifferent mother. From as early as elementary school, Levi engaged in troubling acts, including arson, substance abuse, and killing animals for amusement. These behaviors seem to reflect the dysfunctional environment he grew up in. Levi's abusive father was the first to frequently harm him and expose him to alcohol and banned substances. When police visited Levi's home, they were shocked by what they found. One wall was covered with ceremonial knives, swords, and weapons. Strangely, despite often struggling to afford food, Levi always managed to buy ammunition and weapons. Levi's obsession with violence contradicted the defense's claim that he was a good person shaped by an adverse childhood and environment. The prosecution painted a different picture, portraying Levi King as a predator waiting for his chance to strike. They described him as someone who took pleasure in the smell of blood and gunpowder. The prosecution's main witness was Robin, the sole survivor of Levi's attack. The trial was a deeply traumatic experience for her. She was determined to confront the man who had destroyed her family. Up until that moment, she had been filled with anger and wished for his death. Later, Robin shared her story with journalists. She explained that when she first looked into Levi's eyes in court, she was struck by how empty and cold he seemed. As she saw his lifeless eyes, she forgave him. Robin realized it was pointless to waste energy on someone so devoid of humanity. She understood that Levi could not have become any other kind of person. After about 8 hours of deliberation, the jury decided that the death penalty was too harsh for someone as mentally unstable as he was. They sentenced Levi to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Levi was eventually extradited to Missouri to serve his life sentence there. For a long time after the attack on her family, Robin struggled with severe psychological trauma. She frequently had nightmares, couldn't sleep well, and was unable to go outside alone. Even years later, the effects of her trauma would resurface. However, thanks to the support of her loved ones, she was able to overcome them. The case of Robin Doan raises many questions about the influence of psychology and deviant behavior. Gaming addiction and the use of high doses of antidepressants may be closely related to a number of factors that cause the psychology of people facing stress or psychological disorders to become unstable, leading to violent behavior. The case of Christina Woods. Christina was born on August 19, 1989 in South Bend, Indiana, USA. Her mother, Mary, was only 18 years old when she gave birth to her. Christina was the first child in the family and later had 2 younger sisters and 2 younger brothers, forming a large family. From a young age, she dreamed of an ideal married life and having many children. However, during her elementary school years, family problems began to arise, ultimately leading to her father's departure. Christina wanted to avoid the mistakes of her parents and build a complete family, but during her school years, she realized the difficulties and realities of adult life. Christina then met an older man and became pregnant, even though she was very young. She decided to keep the baby, and when she was 16 years old, she gave birth. Unfortunately, the father of the baby was a terrible parent because he abandoned her and the baby. Her mother's life was similar. Her father also abandoned the family. Witnessing her mother's struggles and sacrifices made Christina realize how challenging her own situation would be. Despite facing challenges, Christina was determined to be a good mother, and her relatives believed she succeeded, especially considering her young age. At 17 years old, she met Troy, a 30-year-old man who worked at a store near her home. Although she had always liked older men, the age difference made Troy seem very mature. Despite her mother's warnings about the age gap, they connected and began dating. Their relationship deepened, and they married on November 14, 2007, when Christina turned 18. A year later, she became pregnant again. Tragically, on April 21, 2009, Christina experienced her first heartbreak when her daughter, Lillian, passed away due to health complications. During this difficult time, she sought comfort from Troy, but found it hard to connect with him. He was emotionally distant and held conservative views. Ultimately, Christina had 4 children in total: Haley, Sierra, Kira, and Anthony. Friends and family describe her as friendly and cheerful. In contrast, her husband Troy wanted to control every aspect of their lives. He expected Christina to stay at home and manage household chores, but as a young woman, she was not ready for that. She wanted to enjoy life, spend time with friends, attend parties, and escape from constant control. Troy tried to force her into a routine but failed, which frustrated him and led to many arguments. He often lashed out at her, humiliating her over minor issues. One night, during an unexpected conflict, he assaulted her for the first time. Unable to endure the abuse, she reported him to the police. When officers arrived, Troy tried to blame her for the situation, but his excuses fell flat. She had visible injuries which led to his arrest. Christina decided to break up with Troy, but this choice caused more controversy. After his release from jail, his behavior became erratic. He stalked her and issued threats whenever they crossed paths in public. To protect herself, she sought a restraining order against him. Despite this, he repeatedly violated the order and faced multiple arrests, but he did not face any serious consequences for his actions. In the fall of 2017, Christina was diagnosed with cancer. Fortunately, the disease was caught early enough that surgery could have saved her. However, after the surgery, she had to rest in bed. During this time, Troy began to show renewed interest in Christina. He wants to reconcile and live as a family again, but she makes it clear that she only sees him as the father of her children. She wanted him to bond with the kids, but didn't want to rekindle their relationship. While recovering from surgery at home, Christina received frequent visits from family and friends, especially her mother and her 2 best friends, Gina and Brooke. Brooke often came over with her husband Daniel Lynn. She and Brooke were childhood friends, growing up together and being as close as family. One evening, Christina's mother, Mary, came to look after her daughter and planned to stay overnight. To her surprise, she found Daniel there. Initially, she thought nothing of it. However, as the night went on, his behavior became increasingly odd. First, Brooke wasn't there. Second, Daniel didn't leave even after Mary offered to take care of Christina and told him he could go home. He ended up staying all night, proving that this was more than just a casual visit. The next morning, Mary ran into Brooke, who expressed concern about Daniel's behavior. Mary asked why he visited Christina when she was away and why he stayed overnight. She was surprised and had no answer, as she had no idea what was going on. She was devastated when she discovered that her husband, Daniel, had been having an affair with her best friend Christina for a long time. Feeling betrayed and unhappy, she went straight to confront Christina. She felt deceived not only by her husband, but also by someone she considered a close friend, someone she had grown up with. When Brooke confronted Christina, a heated argument ensued. Christina admitted that for the past 10 years, she and Brooke's husband Daniel had been secretly involved while pretending to be just friends. They had been enjoying their affair without any intention of ending it. This revelation infuriated Brooke. Meanwhile, Christina's ex-husband Troy learned about the situation. He realized that their marriage had been built on betrayal, as Christina had also cheated on him. Seizing the opportunity, he decided to fight for full custody of their children, claiming he was concerned for their well-being due to Christina's irresponsible behavior. However, her family and friends believed that Troy's real purpose in seeking custody was to hurt her as much as possible. Despite this, Daniel's relationships with both Brooke and Christina continued, creating a complicated love triangle. Daniel alternated between living with Brooke and Christina, often choosing one woman while arguing with the other. Both women were aware of this situation but chose to tolerate it, and neither was willing to end the cycle. This led to tensions between them, resulting in constant arguments and even physical fights. In May 2018, Daniel spent time with Christina again. She urged him to leave Brooke for her, but this discussion was starting to frustrate him. Their conversation turned into another argument, which escalated into violence, leaving Christina injured and hospitalized. Despite this incident, she did not end her relationship with Daniel, seemingly holding on to hope for a future with him, even though he was married to her friend Brooke. During this time, Christina was in regular contact with her ex-husband Troy, who was determined to gain full custody of their children. Their relationship seemed to improve, but he remained focused on gaining more custody of the children. She felt relieved to have the chance to take her mind off the complications of her love life and spend quality time with her children. On June 9, 2018, Christina attended a job interview in hopes of finding a job and improving her financial situation. Although she still relied on Troy and her family for support, she understood that this reliance couldn't last forever. It was crucial for her to regain her independence and achieve career success to ensure a stable future for herself and her children. After the interview, Christina called her mother, Mary, to share the good news that she had passed the interview and got the job. While driving, she mentioned that she would call her mother again once she got home. She wanted to discuss plans for a celebration with her mother and sister. The drive would take her about 15 to 20 minutes. Her mother was thrilled and eagerly awaited the call. However, an hour passed, and Christina still hadn't called, which made her mother anxious. She tried to distract herself with work, but she felt uneasy. As this was unlike Christina, Mary decided to call Christina, but she didn't answer. Mary then sent text messages and tried to contact her daughter through various messaging apps, but she did not respond. Throughout the day, she tried to contact her daughter. By evening, she felt compelled to contact the police. Unfortunately, they informed her that not enough time had passed to consider Christina a missing person. Because she was an adult, she had the right to leave without reporting it. The police advised her to wait another day. Mary then went to Christina's house to check, but found no sign of her or the children. It seems she hasn't come home yet, and the kids are with their father Troy. This situation made Mary more worried, but she decided to wait until the next day, hoping that things would become clearer. The following day, Mary still couldn't reach her daughter and decided to contact the police to report her missing. This time, the police took her report seriously without hesitation. The situation was becoming very serious because Christina was a responsible mother with 4 children. She was expected to keep in touch with and care for her children. The strangest thing was that a court hearing was scheduled for June 1238, where custody between Christina and Troy would be decided. However, she did not appear at the hearing, and Troy had to go to court alone. On that same day, Christina's stepfather received a strange message from her. She mentioned having problems and needing help, asking him to come get her. However, 2 hours later, her stepfather received another message from her, saying she was okay and instructing him not to tell her mother, Mary. At that moment, her relatives were finally convinced that something bad had happened to her. During this time, the police were actively searching for Christina, hoping she would show up in court. However, suspicions grew that she was a victim of a crime, as no traces of her could be found. The police began to investigate the complex details of her life and relationships. From the beginning, her ex-husband Troy was the prime suspect, as they often had conflicts. They were in a serious custody dispute, giving him a strong motive to harm her. Despite this, Troy was one of the few who cooperated with the investigation. Meanwhile, neither Brooke nor Daniel was interested in finding Christina, which made people suspicious of them. Eventually, it was established that Troy was not involved. He had an alibi confirmed by several witnesses at the time of Christina's disappearance. He had been with the children and appeared genuinely worried about Christina's situation. Despite their disagreements, Troy did not want the children to grow up without their mother. He was more focused on gaining full custody because Christina's life was chaotic, and he wanted to protect the children from that instability. The second suspect is Daniel Lynn, Brooke's husband. Daniel owned a house in St. Louis County, Minnesota. Investigators analyzed Christina's phone data and discovered that this house was the last place she had visited. It is worth noting that the house had been abandoned for 5 years, and Daniel rarely maintained it. Detectives then went to investigate the area for any sign of Christina. At first, the house seemed normal, befitting its abandoned state. Despite the house being vacant for years, there was a strong scent of cleaning products wafting in from a slightly open window, suggesting recent use. On the kitchen table, they found gloves commonly used for cleaning. Neighbors reported unusual activity around the house, stating that several cars had been parked there from June 11th to June 15th. Investigators later also looked at Daniel's recent bank transactions. They found that shortly before Christina went missing, he bought a significant amount of cleaning products and protective gear similar to what was found in the house at a local hardware store. They asked to see the video from the surveillance camera. On that day, Daniel was not shopping alone. Brooke was with him, and both appeared tense. The store clerk who assisted them confirmed this. He noticed Daniel trying to contain his anxiety with a distracted look in his eyes, while Brooke looked very uneasy. Shortly after, the detectives noticed a large fire pit on Daniel's land, where they discovered several items that had been partially burned by the fire. Among these were fragments of a mobile phone, a bracelet, a button from a pair of jeans, and several other melted items that had an inscription from an amusement park. This was the same park where Christina had spent time with Troy and the children shortly before she went missing. Troy confirmed that all of these items could have been burned. This coincidence cannot be just a coincidence, however. The information needs to be verified. On July 2, 2018, 24 days after Christina went missing, the police conducted a thorough search of the area around Daniel's house. They searched nearly every inch of the area and then discovered a fresh grave. As they dug deeper, they found Christina's body. After conducting an autopsy, experts confirmed that she had been beaten for an extended period and had suffered severe injuries. However, the cause of death was determined to be strangulation. Subsequently, detectives sought an arrest warrant for 40-year-old Daniel Lynn. However, he was not planning to surrender and went into hiding, leaving no clues about his location. Meanwhile, the police tried to locate Brooke and discovered that she had also disappeared. That evening, an anonymous witness contacted the police and reported that Daniel had gone to a trailer park several hundred miles from his home. The witness also indicated that Daniel had likely harmed Christina, as he had confessed to doing so. When the police arrived at the trailer park, Daniel and Brooke had disappeared again. Local residents confirmed that they had been there and pointed out the trailer they used. Detectives later found a receipt from a gas station a few miles away in a trash bin. CCTV footage showed them entering the store together, holding hands. This clearly indicated that Brooke was not a victim of kidnapping. She had been with Daniel willingly. On July 3, 2018, Brooke suddenly appeared and was immediately arrested and taken to the police station. She reported that Daniel had called her earlier that day, the day Christina went missing. He asked her to bring tools and some items from their home, saying that their family farm was flooded and needed repairs. When Brooke brought the items to him, she found Christina there. Brooke admitted that Christina and Daniel had argued, which led to a fight. She said that she just stood by and watched without trying to intervene. In a fit of rage, he hit Christina so hard that she fell and lost consciousness. He then took Brooke outside and returned to the house with a shovel. Brooke went to the car and waited for him to return. When Daniel finally came back, he appeared out of breath and covered in dirt. Brooke maintains that she had nothing to do with Christina's death, but believes that Daniel killed and buried Christina on their land. However, she could not specify the exact location, claiming she did not witness the events. Brooke mentioned that she had not seen Daniel since that day and was unaware of his current whereabouts. The detectives did not inform her that Christina's body had already been discovered. Instead, they hoped to catch her in a lie or find inconsistencies in her story, but there were very few. After that, they sent her home, but asked her to contact the police if she learned anything new about Christina. However, they began to closely monitor her movements and noticed that she frequently visited a trailer park where her parents owned a small house. Although Brooke had previously claimed she didn't know Daniel's whereabouts, surveillance footage showed them together at a gas station, suggesting they had run away together. It's possible they later separated. The detectives decided to verify her story when she returned to the trailer park. Brooke was already there when they arrived. They entered the trailer and found Daniel inside. Both immediately refused to answer questions and requested a lawyer. There was no resistance, and they were subsequently arrested. Many questions arose regarding Brooke's possible involvement in the murder. While Daniel's DNA was found on Christina's body, this does not necessarily mean he acted alone. His wife, Brooke, may also have played a role in attacking Christina, disposing of the body, and cleaning up the crime scene to the point of leaving no evidence. According to Brooke, Daniel and Christina's relationship was complicated, and he often treated her badly. Despite this, Christina forgave him repeatedly due to her strong feelings for him. She often expressed that she felt like part of his family and was reluctant to end their relationship. Christina believes that once she becomes financially independent, she can work through her issues with Troy and improve her relationship with Daniel. Unfortunately, her hopes never came true, eventually leading to her tragic murder. Daniel and Brooke were questioned. Brooke claimed that Christina had provoked the aggression, as she always did, which made it difficult for Daniel to control himself. However, he refused to cooperate with the investigation. His lawyer argued that the prosecutor's office lacked sufficient evidence to press charges, but this was incorrect. Daniel Lynn was held on $1 million bail, which he was unable to pay, forcing him to remain in jail. To avoid severe punishment, he agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. He confessed to second-degree murder, which carries a maximum sentence of 40 years. As a result of the plea deal, he received a 16-year prison term. Brooke pleaded guilty to assisting Daniel, which allowed her to avoid a jury trial. Christina's mother and those who cared about her were shocked to learn that Brooke was sentenced to only 1 year in prison. Brooke admitted to witnessing the abuse of her best friend Christina without intervening. However, the prosecutor's office could not find enough evidence to charge her with a crime. After serving her sentence, Brooke continued her relationship with Daniel. Christina's family was outraged. Even her ex-husband Troy criticized the leniency of the sentence, but they were unable to have the court's decision overturned. They had to accept the outcome. Although Christina lost custody of her 4 children, her eldest daughter Haley, who was 15 at the time, was allowed to live with her maternal grandmother, while the other 3 children went to live with their father. In an interview after the trial, Christina's mother expressed her desire for her daughter to be remembered not as a victim of crime or violence, but as a loving mother, daughter, and sister. She tried to persuade the court to reconsider the case and increase the sentence, but her efforts were unsuccessful. Sarah Foxwell was born on May 18, 1998 in Salisbury, Maryland. She grew up in a big family with 2 sisters and 4 brothers. Her mother also had 3 more kids from a previous marriage. Eventually, Sarah's parents divorced and her mom faced tough times, having to take care of all of the kids on her own. She had to work a lot, so the kids often stayed with relatives. Sarah was the middle child, always trying to keep the peace among her siblings when they were arguing and fighting. She always radiated positivity and usually succeeded in bringing her family together. In December 2009, when Sarah was 11, she temporarily moved in with her aunt and grandparents. Christmas was coming, and her mom was working extra shifts to buy gifts for every kid. Her aunt lived on the outskirts of Salisbury in a large farmhouse. The kids loved it there because of the vast space to play around. On December 22nd, everything seemed normal. With just 3 days until Christmas, the kids were in high spirits, running around the house, playing and just having fun. Their aunt ordered pizza for dinner, and around 9 p.m., they all started getting ready for bed. Sarah slept in the same room with her 6-year-old sister, Emma, at the end of the hallway near the back door. They chatted for a bit and fell asleep. The next morning, Sarah's grandpa woke up and went to wake the kids. He went into the girls' room but found only Emma there. Thinking that Sarah might have already woken up, he searched the entire house but couldn't find her. He told her aunt about it, and they started to search every corner together. Eventually, they realized that Sarah wasn't in the house. Her aunt thought she might have gone outside to play in the snow that had fallen overnight, but she quickly realized Sarah's shoes and jacket were still at home. Then, her aunt noticed something strange. Sarah's toothbrush was missing from its usual spot in the bathroom. After searching the area around the house with her grandpa and finding no signs of Sarah, her aunt decided to call her mother. She rushed over and they contacted the police. The officers arrived within minutes and immediately began searching the house. Sarah's aunt told them that she always checked all the doors and windows every night before bed, and she had done so the previous evening as well. The police couldn't find Sarah anywhere inside the house or nearby. Upon learning about the missing toothbrush, the officers began to consider the possibility of an abduction. Maybe the kidnapper grabbed this item before leaving the house with Sarah, so they decided to check if all the doors and windows were indeed locked. As they approached the back door next to Sarah's room and tried the handle, it opened right away. Sarah's aunt swore the door was locked the night before and hadn't been opened since. However, she remembered they kept a spare key outside near the entrance. She went there and checked it, but the key wasn't there. This further supported the abduction theory. The fact that the perpetrator knew about the spare key suggested that he knew the family quite well. Another unsettling detail was that their dog hadn't made a sound that night, despite usually barking at strangers. Fearing that Sarah might have been kidnapped, investigators immediately initiated a large-scale search. News of her disappearance spread rapidly, and many local residents contacted the police offering their help. The sheriff appealed to the public through the media, asking them to check their properties for anything that might look suspicious. Dozens of local officers were called for the search. They also got help from neighboring towns' departments and even other states. They all hoped to find Sarah alive. Given that the perpetrator had taken her toothbrush, it might indicate his plans to keep her alive, so the police devoted all their resources to the search. Outside the house, they found their lead. There were relatively fresh tire tracks in the snow, indicating that the abductor likely arrived by car. Since all of Sarah's warm clothing was left behind, it was clear that the perpetrator couldn't have taken her on foot. Meanwhile, Sarah's relatives were brought to the police station where something unexpected happened. Sarah's 6-year-old sister, Emma, who slept in the same room with her, tugged at her grandmother's sleeve and whispered that she had a secret. She saw the person who took Sarah. According to the girl, she woke up to this man saying something to her sister. Emma didn't understand what was happening but got scared, so she pretended to be asleep. A few moments later, she saw the man leave the room with Sarah. This story shocked her relatives, but then Emma said something even more chilling. She recognized the man. It was Mr. Tommy. The adults immediately knew exactly who she meant. It was 30-year-old Thomas Leggs, the former boyfriend of Sarah's aunt. Although they had broken up a few months ago, he had spent a lot of time at their house and all the kids knew him well. The police were also familiar with Thomas due to his extensive criminal record. Over the years, he had repeatedly come to their attention for crimes involving women and girls. He landed behind bars at the age of 18 for assaulting a 12-year-old girl and receiving a 4-year sentence, but he was released early, just after a few months. Later, he received a 7-year sentence for assaulting another minor. However, he was released early again, this time after serving only 6 months due to his good behavior. Shortly after, he received a 6-month sentence for another assault. Then he attempted to assault another girl on the same day. His wife returned home from the hospital with their newborn daughter. The woman later divorced him and obtained a restraining order against Thomas because he had threatened to kill both her and their daughter. Another incident happened when a woman and her little daughter moved to the street where Thomas had lived. One day, the girl, along with her friend, was sitting on the porch of her house. Thomas approached them and told one of the girls that he had been watching her play in the yard and called her a wild girl. Then he grabbed a stick and began hitting her on the buttocks. The girl ran inside and told her mom about what just happened. The woman saw Thomas through the window and realized she had already seen his face. Before moving to this house, she had checked the sex offender registry in this area, and there was a photo of Thomas. The mother reported him to the police, and the case went to court, but Thomas managed to avoid any punishment for his actions. Before the trial began, the woman was asked not to mention the fact that Thomas was in the sex offender list and had previously been convicted of sexual assault. The reason for this request was the concern that mentioning it would bias the jury, potentially leading to an unfair verdict for Thomas. Just a few months before Sarah's disappearance, Thomas was arrested once again. He had broken into the bedroom of a 24-year-old woman in the middle of the night, undressed, and began pleasuring himself while standing next to her bed. After his arrest, he was released on bail. Thomas successfully hid his criminal history from Sarah's aunt, but she eventually learned about it. Nevertheless, he somehow managed to convince her that all these accusations were false and that he hadn't done anything he was accused of. Considering all of this, detectives had no doubt that Thomas was behind Sarah's abduction. Her relatives also noted that during the time the man was dating Sarah's aunt, he spent significantly more time with Sarah than with the other kids in the house. Back then, no one thought much of it, but after her disappearance, this fact seemed very disturbing. The police wanted to speak with Thomas, so they headed to his place. The man lived just a few miles away, in a shed on his parents' property. Investigators took him in for questioning and also obtained a warrant to search the shed. Inside, there was a mess and horrible living conditions, but no evidence linking him to Sarah's disappearance was found. However, the police discovered a large collection of magazines and DVD discs containing adult materials. The shed was literally filled with them. During the interrogation, Thomas repeatedly denied his involvement in Sarah's disappearance. He claimed that he was trying to deal with his problems, referring to his propensity for committing crimes against underage girls. According to Thomas, during the time he was dating Sarah's aunt, he deliberately avoided being alone with the children, so no one could falsely accuse him of anything inappropriate. When told that Emma had seen him on the night of the abduction, Thomas claimed that the girl had often made up stories before and he wasn't there. Detectives didn't believe a word he said, and it wasn't just because of Thomas's previous crimes. While they were speaking about the disappearance of 11-year-old Sarah, he repeatedly smiled and mocked. The sheriff even thought that Thomas considered his crime absolutely perfect and that the police wouldn't be able to prove his guilt. Thomas also claimed to have a strong alibi. He said he was at the bar with his friend until late into the night. Investigators immediately checked this story, and to their surprise, the alibi was confirmed. Thomas was indeed seen in the bar, but there was a catch. He left around 1 a.m., and since then, no one, including his parents, had seen him until around 7 a.m. During the examination of his phone, they also found that on that night, Thomas had sent messages to several women offering to meet up, but all of them declined. Despite all of this, detectives still couldn't crack Thomas. They hoped that the girl was still alive, so they put all their efforts into finding her. When they seized his pickup truck, the police immediately discovered several significant clues. Inside the vehicle lay Sarah's green toothbrush and a large lollipop. Investigators thought that Thomas could have used the candy to lure her into his car. The tire tracks also matched with the tracks left in the snow in front of the house on the night of Sarah's disappearance. The man himself told detectives that he hadn't been to that house in over a month, and now they had proof that he had lied. Despite the fact that Thomas continued to deny everything, the police still hoped to find Sarah. Hundreds of officers and volunteers continued searching the area, scouring the territory for many miles around her house. They checked abandoned buildings, forests, ravines, and bodies of water. Canine units with search dogs tried to pick up the girl's scent, while helicopters scoured the area from above. The police also received enormous support from the local community. People came to the police station and signed up as volunteers, despite the bad weather and the approaching holidays. Unfortunately, on that day, the search once again yielded no results. But no one even thought about giving up, and early the next morning, they went out to search for her again. Throughout this time, the stream of volunteers not only didn't dwindle, but grew even larger. In total, 3,000 people joined the search efforts. The sheriff even had to relocate the coordination center to the large baseball stadium because the police station simply couldn't fit such a huge number of people. Notably, among the volunteers were not only adults, but also their children. They handed out water, hot tea, and food. Everyone tried to do their best, hoping that eventually, it would help them find Sarah alive. Meanwhile, investigators obtained another piece of evidence linking Thomas to the abduction. As soon as the man was brought to the station, he was given a new set of clothes, and his own clothes were sent to the lab. Experts found foreign DNA on the suspect's underwear and compared it to a sample from Sarah obtained from her belongings. It was a complete match. Considering the fact that DNA was found on his underwear, detectives came to a grim conclusion. Apparently, after the abduction, Thomas sexually assaulted her. The day of the search also yielded no results, and on the morning of December 25th, Christmas Day, thousands of people once again went to look for Sarah. Despite the holiday, none of them even considered giving up. On that same day, investigators received GPS data from Thomas's phone. Unfortunately, there weren't exact locations, but rather just information about his phone connecting to specific cell towers. Police found out that on the night of Sarah's disappearance, his phone had connected to 3 towers, allowing them to determine the approximate triangular area where he must have been. Investigators focused all their efforts in this area, which was located practically on the state border, about 8 miles from Sarah's aunt's house. This area was mostly covered with trees. Hundreds of people combed through every inch of this territory, hoping for a Christmas miracle that Sarah would be found alive. Unfortunately, reality turned out to be much more tragic. Around 4 p.m., police noticed Sarah's body on the ground, almost at the state border. She lay on her back, with her arms raised upwards, pointing towards the sky. When medical experts began examining the body, even they were shocked. They confirmed the victim had been sexually assaulted. They found signs of strangulation but determined that the perpetrator had failed to kill her that way. In Sarah's lungs, experts found dirt, leading them to believe that the killer had attempted to drown her in a puddle. During this torture, the victim lost consciousness. After that, she suffered severe burns. According to the experts, the perpetrator may have left her lying in the forest for some time, went to get gasoline, came back, and set Sarah on fire. Traces of smoke were also found in her lungs, indicating that she was still alive at that moment. This also explained why her hands were raised and pointing to the sky. This sometimes happens when a person is exposed to fire. Such unimaginable cruelty shocked everyone involved in the case. Even the detectives found it difficult to believe that all these atrocities had truly been committed against the victim. But now, when they knew what had happened to Sarah, all they wanted was one thing: to secure the death penalty for Thomas. Despite the fact that he continued to deny everything, there was an impressive amount of evidence against him. After the discovery of the body, forensic experts found several hairs belonging to Sarah and particles of fabric from her pajamas on the front seat of Thomas's pickup truck, further proving his involvement in the abduction. With all the other evidence, this practically ruled out any possibility of him avoiding punishment. The wait for the trial stretched for more than a year, but it never began. In early 2011, the prosecution decided to offer Thomas a plea deal. Under its conditions, he would admit his guilt and receive a life sentence instead of the death penalty. Considering what he had done to Sarah, this deal might seem unfair, but there were a few serious reasons in favor of such a decision. The main one was that Sarah's younger sister would have to testify repeatedly in court in the presence of the murderer. The abduction and death of her sister became a serious challenge for her, and the trial could have affected her even more. Another reason for offering the deal was that the prosecution could not be 100% sure of securing a death sentence. If Thomas's lawyers had achieved a different verdict, he could have the opportunity to be released someday, which was not part of the terms of the deal under any circumstances. There was another problem. The state governor opposed the death penalty at that time, further reducing the chances of obtaining this sentence. In the end, Thomas agreed and told detectives everything they already knew without him. He admitted that he tricked Sarah into leaving her house with him. Then he took her away, sexually assaulted, and killed her. He received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole and was transferred to a maximum security prison. In the few days, another inmate attacked him with a makeshift weapon during lunch, inflicting several serious cuts. Thomas survived, and prison staff took additional measures to protect him from other inmates who wanted to harm him. Sarah's case sparked outrage because the system repeatedly gave Thomas the opportunities to be released and continue committing crimes. Eventually, the state of Maryland passed Sarah's law, which mandates that anyone convicted of child abuse must serve at least 15 years in prison before being eligible for parole. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, her mom met a man named David, and they got married. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their wedding, she and David had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent a lot of time outdoors riding her bike around town, enjoying swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also liked going to Sunday school at the local church, where she always volunteered to help other kids who had some issues with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old, she was in the 4th grade at the local elementary school. Her mom worked the night shift at a store while her stepdad spent most of the day on the farm. This left Rowan often fending for herself, which made her very independent. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mom went to work, and her stepdad hadn't returned from the farm yet. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Colleen came home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter wasn't there. She asked her husband where her daughter was. He said she had asked him if she could have a sleepover at a friend's house and he had let her go. He didn't even ask the friend's name because their town was very small and he wasn't worried about anything happening to her. But Colleen started to worry and decided to check with all of Rowan's friends. Since there were only a few streets in their town, it didn't take long. But none of them had seen her, and she hadn't stayed over at any of their houses, which made her mother even more concerned. Colleen searched the whole town, but couldn't find her daughter. She went back home and told her husband that Rowan was nowhere to be found. She asked him to call the police and report her missing, but he reassured her that everything was fine and that she would come home soon. After waiting for several more hours with no sign of Rowan, Colleen took matters into her own hands and dialed 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to their house to speak with David, as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared. David said that on that evening, while he was working on the farm with his colleague, Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan came by. They all decided to go to David's place to have some drinks and play pool. They stopped by the store, bought some alcohol, and went to David's house where they spent several hours. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town where his trailer was, and they persuaded David to join them to continue the fun. Before leaving the house, he checked on Rowan in her room. Seeing that she was asleep, David left with his friends. They stopped by the store again, grabbed more alcohol, and headed to Christopher's trailer where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and asked Nathan to give him a ride. Nathan agreed, but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway. By that time, he was quite drunk and didn't want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped him off and drove home, while David went straight to bed. Soon after, he was awakened by Rowan, who asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and fell back asleep. Police approached this story with some skepticism. What puzzled them most was the fact that a 9-year-old girl decided to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather let her go without even asking which friend she was talking about. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. The population of Stella was only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread throughout the county almost instantly. People were used to being able to let their children play outside without a worry, as nothing ever happened in such a quiet place. But now, when Rowan vanished without a trace and the police were unable to find her for a whole day, the residents of Stella were in a state of panic. The first day of the search yielded no results. On November 4th, the police went to the neighboring town to speak with Christopher, who fully corroborated David's story. However, Christopher added that his friend hadn't even contacted him since that evening and he had only just found out about Rowan's disappearance. On the same day, the police expanded the search and involved even more volunteers, but they still couldn't find Rowan or any clues to her whereabouts. The next morning, the FBI joined the investigation. While the local police continued to search for Rowan throughout the town and its surroundings, detectives focused on exploring the possibility of abduction. They strongly doubted the stepfather's story as it seemed highly questionable. Police also checked with all of Rowan's friends and confirmed that she hadn't visited any of them that night. Investigators continued to speak with David, and he changed certain details in his story several times, further raising suspicions against him. For instance, he gave conflicting timelines for his absence from home that night, and even said that perhaps Rowan hadn't asked him for permission to go to her friend's house and just left without his knowledge. FBI agents also discovered that on the night of her disappearance, David had asked his mother to borrow her car, a fact he had initially not disclosed to the police. As a result, they decided to seize both this car and his own pickup truck for examination, but experts were unable to uncover any evidence. Meanwhile, detectives decided to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, as they were both with David that evening. Police invited Christopher to the station. He repeated the same story as the day before. He also agreed to a polygraph test, which showed no signs of deception. Several hours after Christopher left the station and returned to work, he noticed Sheriff Clark's car and waved for him to stop. Sheriff Clark led the police department in their town called Witten and had known Christopher for 17 years since his childhood. The sheriff was friends with his foster parents, and Christopher always respected him. He often sought his advice or help in difficult times, such as when his mother passed away. Sheriff Clark approached Christopher and they discussed Rowan's disappearance. The sheriff was aware of the case but had not been involved in it as the search was being handled by the Stella department. During their conversation, the sheriff felt that Christopher's behavior was quite weird, and he suspected that Christopher might be withholding some information from him. Considering that Rowan's life was at stake and her fate remained unknown, Clark decided to share his suspicions with the FBI. He contacted the agents and told them about his concerns. Investigators assumed that Christopher might be withholding some significant information that could implicate Rowan's stepfather in her disappearance. Perhaps he had asked Christopher to lie and change certain details in the story of that evening. And now Christopher feared being implicated as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark informed the FBI agents that he had a close and trusting relationship with Christopher, so he offered to help persuade him to talk. That same evening, Christopher went to Colleen's house to ask her if there was any progress in the search. About the same time, FBI agents also arrived to speak with Rowan's mother again. When they saw Christopher there, they also asked him some questions, and he once again repeated that the events of that evening unfolded exactly as he had previously said. But then he mentioned for the first time that he did not rule out the possibility of David's involvement in her disappearance, and said that he wanted to help them uncover the truth no matter how terrible it might be. He even suggested wearing a wire and going to talk to David to try to coax him into confessing, but at that point, the detectives decided not to resort to such tactics. Instead, they asked Christopher if he had any locations in mind where his friend could have hidden Rowan's body, and he named it several places. The next morning, police set out to search these locations, as well as continuing their search in the surrounding areas of Stella. FBI agents once again brought David for questioning, Sheriff's office to speak with Clark and told him about his encounter with the FBI. During their conversation, the sheriff had a strong feeling that Christopher was still withholding something. After their meeting, he contacted the detectives again and told them that Christopher might be keeping some information that could likely help them prove David's involvement. FBI agents asked the sheriff to continue trying to persuade him to talk. Based on the fact that Christopher had repeatedly contacted Clark to discuss the case with him, they believed he wanted to share important information, but for some reason, he was afraid to do so. The next day, on November 7th, the police called Christopher back to the station. They needed his consent to search his safe located in David's house. Christopher had been living with him for several months when he temporarily didn't have a place of his own, and some of his belongings were still there. Christopher gave them his permission and also agreed to allow the police to search his trailer and his car. He also voluntarily provided them with a DNA sample, and he agreed to answer the detectives' questions again. They began questioning him about that evening and once again asked him to confirm David's story. But this time, Christopher suddenly admitted that his friend's story wasn't entirely true, and the investigators began pressing him to tell them what really happened. But this pressure only caused Christopher to become agitated. He said that if the police were going to treat him like a criminal and attempt to accuse him of involvement in Rowan's disappearance, he would not continue this conversation. After that, detectives had to end the interrogation, and Christopher left the station. That same evening, he went to Sheriff Clark and told him about it. He complained that Sheriff replied that it was his right, but asked him to understand that the police were just doing everything possible to find Rowan. In response, Christopher stated that he would no longer speak with them and that if he wanted to share anything else, he would only speak with Clark. The sheriff continued to persuade Christopher to tell him everything he knew, and at some point, Christopher began to cry. He said that he always loved Rowan and would never harm her. During the time when he lived in David's house, he developed a close bond with Rowan and the other children. They began to treat him like a family member and even called him Uncle Christopher. The sheriff understood that Christopher was on the brink of revealing everything he knew. However, just as Christopher was about to speak, someone arrived at the police station, distracting Sheriff Clark for some time. Christopher left the office without sharing what he had intended to. Sheriff Clark reached out to the FBI again and told them about this conversation. He explained that Christopher was almost ready to disclose everything he knew, but cautioned that pushing him too hard might cause him to stop talking and get an attorney. Clark suggested to give Christopher some time to think it over, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the next day, again with no luck. But everything changed on November 9th, a week after her disappearance. Search groups reached a remote area near a town called Powell, 10 miles from Stella. There, amidst fields and trees, they discovered a large pit in the ground. When they looked there, they found Rowan's body, concealed under leaves and debris. She was missing all clothing below the waist except and asked him to speak with Christopher again, hoping he would now reveal everything. Sheriff learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station when he wasn't there and informed other officers that he needed to speak urgently with Clark. The sheriff set out to search for Christopher, checking all the places where he might be, but the man was nowhere to be found. It continued until Christopher called Clark himself. He was clearly distressed and asked if he was being followed. He explained that after hearing the news about Rowan's body being found, he drove around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car tailing him. Sheriff Clark replied that he knew nothing about any surveillance and suggested meeting Christopher in person. When they met, Christopher was visibly nervous and expressed concern for his safety. He feared that after Rowan's body was discovered, he might be accused of murder, and someone might seek revenge against him. Clark took him to the station and said that now, when the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time to reveal everything he knew. Christopher began crying again, and the sheriff asked him to tell what David had done to Rowan. In response, Christopher stated that there were too many people at the police station, and he didn't want to discuss it here. He suggested going to a quieter place and mentioned a small bridge located a few miles from their town. Clark agreed, and they drove there together. As they got out of the car, Christopher unexpectedly raised his hands and said that he should handcuff him. The sheriff was surprised and replied that it wasn't necessary, but Christopher said, "After what I tell you, you'll have to do it." After this, he began talking. Christopher repeated the first part of the story he had told the police many times. He, along with Nathan and David, went to his trailer where they continued drinking. Sometime later, his friends decided to head home, and David asked Nathan for a ride. They said they would take back roads to avoid the police and left. But then Christopher started telling something that shocked the sheriff to the core. He claimed that he wanted to sexually assault Rowan and quickly came up with a plan. Knowing his friends would take quite some time on the road through the fields, he got into his car and drove straight to David's house, taking the main highway. He entered Rowan's room, picked her up and carried her to his car, doing it all so that she wouldn't wake up. After that, he took her to his trailer where he assaulted her. According to him, she only woke up at that moment and tried to resist, but she couldn't break free. Christopher didn't turn on the lights or speak to her because he didn't want Rowan to recognize him. After the crime, he planned to take her back home and leave, but things didn't go as planned. When he carried Rowan out of the trailer, the moon was shining brightly, and she saw his face. Christopher panicked, grabbed a rope, and strangled her. When she passed away, he loaded her body into the car and started thinking about what to do next. At first, he wanted to dump her from the bridge, the same one where he stood with Sheriff Clark. But Christopher realized that her body would be found too quickly, so he got behind the wheel and began driving around the county, considering other options. Soon, he remembered the large pit near the neighboring town and headed there. He dumped the body into the pit and tried to cover it with branches, but the pit was too large, so everything fell down. When he returned to the trailer, he found traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. Christopher also realized he needed to get rid of her pants, underwear, and the rope he used to kill her. He collected all these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. However, Christopher quickly realized that such a fire would definitely attract attention. So he dragged the barrel into the shed, closed the door, and started the fire there. Sheriff Clark was completely taken back by this story. All this time, he thought David had committed the crime, and Christopher was just withholding some information. It was hard for him to believe that the man he had known for almost 20 years was capable of such brutality. Christopher himself had 3 young children, although he didn't live with them after divorcing his wife. He always seemed like a decent man to him, but reality turned out to be way more chilling. After Christopher finished his story, he agreed to voluntarily go to the station, and the sheriff didn't handcuff him. Only after they arrived and the man repeated his confession to the FBI agents, he was arrested on charges of murder. Christopher also signed a voluntary consent to search his trailer and car. Ending his confession, he added that he regretted his actions and said that he cried like a baby all the next day. The detectives immediately went to speak with David and informed him that Christopher had confessed to the murder. Considering David's strange behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected that he might have been covering for his friend. However, they were met with an even more shocking twist. When David was brought in for questioning, he suddenly changed his version of events. According to him, the night he returned home and found Rowan missing from her room, he realized that Christopher might have taken her, so he took his mother's car and drove to his trailer. Upon entering, he saw the girl on the bed with Christopher, leaning over her. Instead of rescuing Rowan, David decided to join in. He also sexually assaulted her. Then, he helped his friend kill her and dispose of the body. David added that during the ordeal, his brain simply shut off and he remembered nothing about the night for several days. The detectives, who were not expecting such a twist, went back to Christopher to confirm David's words. However, Christopher stated that his friend was not involved and that everything happened as he had told them. This further baffled the detectives, but Christopher's story matched the facts. Medical experts confirmed that the victim had been strangled with a thin rope, a detail only the killer would know. During a search of the trailer, the police found a barrel with ashes. In his car, they also discovered hair comparable to Rowan's. Despite investigators still being unable to confidently determine whose version of events was truthful, both men provided incriminating statements, so David was also arrested, and their cases were sent to court. During the trial, Christopher filed a motion to exclude all his statements from the case materials, claiming he was unaware they could be used against him and that the police violated his rights. But the judge denied this motion since all his conversations with investigators were entirely voluntary. Christopher also attempted to plead mitigating circumstances, pointing out his difficult childhood. From an early age, he was constantly shuffled between biological and foster parents, which greatly impacted him. Christopher also invited an expert who claimed he had signs of developmental issues, but none of this helped him avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, he was sentenced to death. He tried to appeal this sentence, but to no avail. As for David, the situation was much more. He admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan. But there was one serious problem. His version contradicted Christopher's statements. If the prosecution decided to charge David with murder, it could potentially lead to Christopher's sentence being overturned, and David might also avoid responsibility. Considering there was no solid evidence against David, such as DNA, the prosecution could not take such a risk. In fact, they still weren't sure if he was involved at all. The prosecution did not rule out the possibility that David might have indeed committed the crime together with Christopher, but there was no evidence to support this theory. In the end, a difficult decision was made. To avoid the risk of Christopher's sentence being overturned, they reduced David's charges to much lighter ones. He pleaded guilty to 2 charges, child endangerment and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison with a minimum of 5 years to be served behind bars. This sentence was met with outrage. If David was indeed involved in the murder, his punishment was deemed incomparable to the severity of the crime. However, there's nothing that can be done about it now, and it's unlikely that he will ever be tried again for this case. As for Christopher, he remains in prison awaiting execution. Considering that decades often pass between sentencing and execution, there are no guarantees that the death penalty will ever be carried out. It's quite possible that he will simply spend the rest of his life in prison. The case of Sidney Powell. Brenda Powell was born in 1969 in Saline, Agua, USA. She graduated from high school and then attended Akron University. After completing her studies, she began working as a pediatrician in the oncology department of her local children's hospital. For over 28 years, she has dedicated herself to helping sick children. Brenda oversees inpatient care and is known to her peers and hospital. They were introduced through a mutual friend who worked with her at the hospital. The couple enjoyed a happy life together for 23 years and welcomed 2 children, a daughter named Sydney and a son named Andrew. Since childhood, Sydney has been passionate about sports, especially football. Her family watched football together every Sunday, which helped strengthen their relationship. They also regularly visited the beach and Disneyland. As Sydney grew older, she and her mother, Brenda, began to spend more time together. While her father and brother watched football, they enjoyed shopping, which further strengthened their relationship. Sydney did well in high school, which helped her pass her exams and gain admission to Mount Union University, where she also received a scholarship. In college, she became friends with Lauren and a group of female students while living on campus. She participated in school events and was introduced to many different activities. Friends described Sydney as friendly and easygoing. Sydney's academic journey took an unexpected turn after her first year. Initially, everything seemed fine. She excelled in her classes and was praised by her teachers, ranking among the top students. Sydney began working part-time during the summer holidays to earn extra money. However, during her second year, Sydney faced significant challenges and decided to move off campus. Her friends were initially confused by this sudden decision but later learned that Sydney was struggling academically. Her grades were dropping. Additionally, Sydney began sleeping excessively, often around 16 hours a day. Sydney's friends thought she could handle it all because she was a smart and hardworking student who had previously done well in school. Unfortunately, Sydney struggled and ended up failing 3 out of 4 exams. Due to strict regulations, she received a notice of expulsion from the university, which shocked everyone. Sydney was worried and shared her concerns with her friends. Fortunately, they informed her that she could reapply for admission. At the beginning of 2020, Sydney resumed her studies, attending classes and sorority meetings. She happily told her friends that she had been readmitted to the university and was doing well. In early February, Sydney was notified that she had to leave the school permanently and that her expulsion would remain in effect. She was offered assistance with moving and packing, and the school planned to notify her parents of her situation to help cover her expenses. However, Sydney told the school administration that her family already knew and did not need to be contacted. This was not true, and she was afraid that her parents would find out about her expulsion. During this time, she told her parents that she was doing well in school and had good grades, and that she had even won a scholarship. Her parents trusted her and had no reason to doubt her. After being evicted from campus, Sydney left but did not return home before the February. Instead, she stayed with friends in various hotels, paying in cash to avoid being tracked and to keep her situation at the university a secret. Although she worked part-time to support herself, her earnings were insufficient. Sydney constantly searched for online opportunities to make money but could not find a full-time job that would provide adequate support. She continued to live in hotels or with friends, afraid to go home. She cut back on everything and often did not eat enough. Eventually, she decided to return home, claiming that the campus was closed for renovations. She told her parents that she would stay with them while she went to college and still work. Her parents believed her and thought everything was fine. Sydney has been lying to her mother by saying that she is fine. Recently, Brenda has noticed some strange changes in her daughter's behavior. She discovers that Sydney is spending more time at home and not going to school, which raises concerns. This information later comes to light because Sydney's entire family uses the Life 360 app, a mobile phone location tracking app on a map for safety, allowing family members to know where each other are. On February 25, 2020, Brenda received a notification from the app that Sydney had stayed home all day instead of coming to college as scheduled. This worried Brenda, who was concerned that something was wrong. She contacted her daughter to find out what was going on. Sydney replied that she had a week off because her teacher was absent. She mentioned that students were given assignments to complete at home and were participating in remote learning. However, Brenda began to doubt Sydney's story. She told her daughter that her explanations did not seem right and reminded her of the importance of good grades to maintain her scholarship and graduate, which would affect her future job opportunities. She also emphasized the importance of attending school regularly. Sydney then reassured her mother that everything was fine and that she should not worry. The deception continued. On March 2nd, Sydney texted her mother, saying she was going to school and would be back by 2:30 p.m. Instead, she spent time with a friend, watching TV, while lying about her college situation. During this time, the parents noticed that something was wrong. Their daughter did not receive the scholarship, so her father, Stephen, had to pay her tuition. He tried to send money through the payment gateway, but could not complete the transaction because he had lost access to his account. Initially, he suspected a technical problem and decided to wait. However, when Stephen logged in on March 3rd while working at a metallurgical plant, he was still unable to complete the transaction. He then asked his daughter about the problem. Sydney reassured him not to worry and promised that she would look into the matter and resolve it. Stephen realized he could not delay any longer as the deadline was near and he needed to pay for his daughter's studies quickly. He decided to contact the university himself to resolve the situation. When he called, the staff checked their records and informed him that Sydney was not listed as a student, meaning her access had been revoked. Stephen was shocked and thought there must be some mistake. He requested they verify the information again, and they confirmed that Sydney had indeed been expelled. However, the university staff would not disclose the date of her expulsion, citing confidentiality rules. Stephen used a tracking app to locate Sydney, who was supposed to be in class. Instead, he discovered she was at home while he was at work. He wanted to go home to talk to her, but he feared she might track his movements and run away. To avoid this, he left his phone at work and headed home. Before leaving, he called Sydney to gather information, but she avoided giving clear answers. During the conversation, she admitted that she was struggling at university and didn't like it there. However, she continued to lie, not confessing that she had been expelled a long time ago. Instead, she claimed she had just not been attending classes. Stephen was troubled by his daughter's situation. He believed she was capable and had a bright future ahead, but he worried that her lack of commitment to attending classes could hinder her progress. He wanted to talk to her about the issue so they could find a solution together. On his way to work, Stephen called Brenda to inform her about their daughter's learning difficulties. Although Brenda suspected something was wrong, she hoped it was not true. Throughout the call, Stephen was concerned about Sydney's situation. However, Brenda reassured him. With a background in psychology, she had a skill for helping others and wanted to use her experience to support their daughter. She promised Stephen that she would take time off work, go home, and have a calm and open discussion with Sydney to ensure that they could all make the best decision together. Brenda then tried to contact the school but was unsuccessful. She left a voicemail asking for a call back and then went home. When Brenda reached her private entrance, she told her husband what had happened and went inside. Meanwhile, teachers Michelle and John received Brenda's message and called her back within the hour. At approximately 12:36 p.m., Brenda answered the phone and spoke calmly to the teachers. Everything seemed normal until Brenda started screaming into the phone, followed by a series of noises. Michelle and John, who were listening on speakerphone, were confused about what was happening but sensed that something was wrong. Michelle and John were worried about what had happened and tried calling Brenda again, but she did not answer. After several tries, a woman finally picked up at 12:40 p.m., but it wasn't Brenda. The teachers recognized Sydney's voice and asked to speak to her mother, but the calls suddenly ended. This situation made Michelle and John suspicious. They decided to contact the local police to check on Brenda. Police officer Kenneth Diss, a friend of Brenda's family, heard the call and was extremely concerned about the alarming situation. He personally called Stephen to ask what was going on at their house, but Stephen could not provide any information because he was not home. After thinking for a moment, the Stephen recalled that Sydney and Brenda were supposed to be at home discussing their study problems. He suspected there might have been a conflict between his wife and daughter, but he couldn't imagine the reality of the situation. Stephen then rushed home and called his daughter, Sydney, to find out what was going on. Sydney reassures him that everything is fine and the atmosphere seems calm. However, when Stephen tells her that the police are on their way, Sydney suddenly becomes hysterical. She begins to cry and reveals that a robber has broken into the house and attacked them. The call then ends abruptly. The police had already arrived at the house when Sydney dashed out, covered in blood and screaming. She told the officers a shocking story about a robber who had broken in and attacked her mother. She said she heard glass breaking and that her mother told her to run, so she did. Sydney then hid in the courtyard, anxiously listening. She then found her mother lying in a pool of blood and she tried to help her, which is how she got blood on her. Inside the house, officers found Brenda lying face up in a room. She was badly injured, with a bloody cast iron skillet nearby and a kitchen knife on the floor. Despite the broken glass, officers began to doubt Sydney's story. Her story about a robber seemed very unbelievable. An ambulance arrived quickly and took Brenda to hospital, where she was taken to the intensive care unit. Sadly, 50-year-old Brenda Powell died shortly after arriving. Sydney was also examined by paramedics, but no serious injuries were found. She was sedated, her cuts were bandaged, and she was sent home. Forensic experts who examined Brenda's body were shocked by the brutality of the attack. She had suffered a severe blow to the back of the head, which caused her scalp to detach from her skull. Additionally, she had numerous stab wounds, estimated to be between 20 and 30, mostly concentrated on her neck. There were also multiple bruises and cuts on her arms, suggesting she had tried to defend herself. A preliminary review of the situation led police to believe that Sydney's account of events was fabricated, although Sydney was covered in blood and had several smaller cuts on her arms. They were significantly less severe than her mother's injuries. It was evident that the robbery had been staged, as nothing was taken from the house. Sydney's actions raised several questions. After her mother told her to leave the house, why didn't she run to the neighbors for help or call 911? Instead, she waited in the yard and later went back into the house without any apparent fear. None of the neighbors reported seeing a robber. The blood found on Sydney was tested and matched her mother's, including traces on the broken glass. Police sent the knife, believed to be the murder weapon, and the frying pan for analysis. Brenda's blood was found on these items, and no fingerprints or other DNA were found at the scene. It appears that Sydney injured herself when she stabbed her mother. Sydney Powell was then taken to the police station for questioning. After the initial panic subsided, she refused to answer any questions. By this time, police investigating the attack had learned about recent events in Sydney's university life. They discovered that she had been expelled a month earlier and had lied to her family about her situation, staying with friends in hotels instead. She was so afraid of disappointing those around her that she had lied not only to her parents but also to her classmates and others. Police believe that Sydney was so afraid of telling the truth that she decided to kill her mother when her mother started to suspect something was wrong. Despite this, Sydney chose to remain silent. 19-year-old Sydney Powell was arrested and charged with murdering Brenda. She also faced charges for causing serious injury and for tampering with evidence to mislead the investigation. Due to her mental health issues, she was unable to admit or deny her guilt. Her lawyer argued that she was insane, stating that Sydney had struggled with serious mental health problems since childhood. At the time of the offense, Sydney may have been experiencing a mental health crisis that affected her perception of her actions. Sydney faced several mental health issues that may have contributed to the violent incident, which led police to request a psychiatric evaluation. During the examination, Sydney spoke about her memories of that day but could only recall bits and pieces. She remembered sitting in the basement, anxious about her parents coming home after her father found out about her struggles. She also remembers her mother coming home and their conversation starting, when her mother comforted her and asked what happened at school. She wished her mother would leave her alone. Then she heard the sound of glass breaking, and then she couldn't remember anything else about what happened. Sydney informed her doctor that she had been experiencing hallucinations since she was 11 years old. She had always been very anxious, responsible, and self-critical, setting extremely high academic standards for herself. At times, her anxiety became so intense that it affected her ability to concentrate on tests, leading to multiple psychological evaluations. After extensive evaluation and discussion with Sydney, the psychiatrist diagnosed her with acute post-traumatic stress disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and depression. Sydney reported that she had recurring nightmares of her mother covered in blood. The lack of a clear motive for the murder led the psychiatrist to determine that Sydney was insane at the time of the incident. Another doctor who worked with the Sydney for at least 3 to 6 months before the crime noted that her mental health had deteriorated significantly. She started losing touch with reality and began failing her exams, which ultimately led to her expulsion from university. Her condition was worsened by extreme self-criticism. She couldn't accept that she had failed. The Sydney was also afraid to confess her struggles to her parents. However, the truth eventually came out, causing her immense stress. This culminated in a psychotic breakdown that resulted in her mother's murder. After her arrest, Sydney's bail was initially set at $250,000 but was later raised to $500,000. One of her relatives posted bail, allowing her to await her trial outside of custody. During this time, she received treatment for her mental health issues and felt significantly better by the time the hearings began. The Sydney eventually regained her composure. After Sydney saw Brenda talking to college teachers, she knew that her mother would soon hear the truth from them. In a psychotic state, she attacked her mother. Teachers at the college heard the beginning of the attack. During the trial, her friends and relatives confirmed that they did not notice any significant changes in her behavior leading up to the crime. Although she was upset about being expelled, she was generally cheerful and sociable. The only noticeable difference was that she began sleeping more. The defense acknowledged that Sydney killed her mother but maintained that she was insane at the time. However, many experts disagreed with the psychiatrist's diagnosis. What everyone agreed on was that she suffered from borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by stubbornness, mood swings, and self-destructive behavior. In addition, signs of hallucinations were reported by Sydney to a psychiatrist when she was 11. There was no evidence in the medical records to support Sydney's claims, which undermined the defense's strategy. Several former friends mentioned that Sydney had exhibited unusual behavior even during her school years. One teacher recalled when Sydney was so nervous that she couldn't read anything on a test. However, teacher didn't realize that Sydney's anxiety could indicate mental health issues, so teacher didn't tell anyone. This type of anxiety continued into college, which may have contributed to Sydney failing her exams and eventually being expelled. While awaiting trial, Sydney lived with her grandmother and was prescribed medication to treat her mental health issues. The medication list and dosage were changed several times to find the most effective combination. Sydney's health improved significantly, and she shared any positive changes with her doctor. Her father also noticed the improvement and admitted that Sydney had a strong bond with her mother and loved her deeply. He believed that if Sydney had been in a healthy state of mind, she would never have harmed her mother. Throughout the trial, Sydney cried continuously, and she expressed remorse for her actions. On September 18, 2023, the jury deliberated. Sydney Powell was found guilty on all counts. Sydney was sentenced to life in prison but will be eligible for parole after 15 years. Sydney and her attorney were unhappy with the sentence and planned to appeal the court's decision. Mitzi Sanchez was born on August 10, 1992 in Vallejo, California. She grew up in a large, close-knit family with 2 brothers and a sister. Mitzi was a cheerful and bright child. She enjoyed spending time outdoors with her friends and playing with her siblings. From a young age, Mitzi was quite independent. When she started elementary school, her parents allowed her to walk there with her brother without any adult supervision. The school was located just a short distance from their home, with most of the route lying along a busy road. August 10, 2000 was Mitzi's 8th birthday. She was excited about the celebration party her family had been preparing for her. Mitzi asked her mom if she could skip school for the occasion, but the woman said no. Mitzi was upset about it, and around 7:30 a.m. she left her home with her brother. After her classes, Mitzi was supposed to wait for her brother so they could walk home together. But when her brother went outside the school, he couldn't find his sister anywhere. Thinking she had already left without him, he headed home alone. But it turned out that Mitzi wasn't there. Their older sister, who was home at that time, immediately became worried. Since Mitzi was eagerly anticipating her birthday party, her absence seemed odd. She waited for some time, hoping that Mitzi would eventually show up, and around 4 p.m., the sister decided to call their mom and tell her about it. Their mom immediately called Mitzi's school and learned that her daughter had attended all her classes. The mother then reached out to family members and Mitzi's friends, but no one had seen her after school. Mitzi's relatives became worried and started searching for her. Many people, from family friends to neighbors, also joined in. Together, they quickly organized a massive search. While some of them walked the streets, others knocked on every door along the route, from the house to school, asking if anyone had seen her. They even started printing and distributing flyers with information about Mitzi. Despite all their efforts, they couldn't find her, so Mitzi's parents decided to call 911. The police immediately joined the search, and local media started covering the case on the same day. Mitzi's disappearance instantly captured the public's attention, since similar incidents had already occurred in their town before. For several years, an unknown perpetrator or multiple perpetrators had been kidnapping kids in Vallejo. The most recent case had occurred in December, less than a year before Mitzi's disappearance. 7-year-old Ziana Fairchild, who lived just a few miles from Mitzi's house, disappeared on her way to school. Despite all the efforts by the police and the FBI, she was never found. Now, when Mitzi vanished on her way home from school, investigators feared the same perpetrator might be involved. Despite the lack of leads at that point, the striking similarities between those cases were already obvious. However, Ziana's case remained unsolved, leaving detectives with little to go on. They began re-examining everyone previously considered a suspect in her case, but it yielded no results. The next day, Mitzi's disappearance made headlines not only in the local news, but statewide. Everyone feared a serial kidnapper was at large and dreaded the possibility of him getting away with it once again. Mitzi's relatives gave multiple interviews, trying to draw more attention to the case. Her mom also pleaded with a possible abductor to return her daughter safely. The police received numerous tips, but none of them proved useful. However, everything changed 24 hours after Mitzi's disappearance when something unexpected happened. A man contacted the police, informing them that he discovered bloodied rags at a landfill. Upon examination, experts determined that the rags were actually bed sheets from a Vallejo hotel. Although they sent the evidence to the lab, blood analysis would take days. Investigators also visited the hotel but were unable to confirm whether Mitzi had been there. With nothing but waiting for lab results, investigators combed the landfill, searching for any other clues, but it yielded nothing. The following day, August 12th, the police received another call, and it changed the course of this case immediately. At around 11 a.m., a man reported driving through an industrial area in Santa Clara when a little girl ran up to his van screaming that someone was chasing her. She climbed into the van's cabin and the driver saw a man running in their direction. The girl yelled that he had kidnapped her and wanted to kill her. As soon as she was in the van, the perpetrator turned around, got into his car, and fled. Meanwhile, the girl told the driver her name was Mitzi Sanchez, and he contacted the police. Officers immediately picked her up and drove her to a hospital for examination. They also called her mother and let her speak to her daughter. Soon after, her relatives rushed to the hospital and reunited with Mitzi. Meanwhile, detectives spoke with the van driver. The man proved a crucial lead. He remembered the license plate of the kidnapper's vehicle because it drove off right in front of his van. Turned out, the van driver was on that road almost by chance. He had a day off, but was asked by his supervisor to cover a shift and deliver a load. If he hadn't been there, the perpetrator possibly could have caught up with the girl. The police ran the license plate and identified the car belonging to a 39-year-old man named Curtis Dean Anderson. He had been on law enforcement's radar before with prior convictions for thefts, kidnapping, and suspicion of other crimes. As investigators focused all efforts on finding the abductor, their colleagues prepared to hear Mitzi's account of what had happened to her. She told them that on August 10th, she was eagerly awaiting the end of school to go home and celebrate her birthday with her family. When her final class ended, Mitzi decided not to wait for her brother and headed home alone. Just a few hundred yards away, she noticed a parked car by the roadside. Inside was a man, watching her intently through the rearview mirror. Mitzi felt uneasy about him, but quickly brushed it off. It was daytime, she was on a familiar street, and being young, she didn't fully grasp the potential danger posed by strangers. As Mitzi approached the car, the man got out and asked her to help him. He said he needed to grab a roll of tape from under the car seat. He also explained that he couldn't bend down himself due to a leg injury from falling off his bike. Despite her uneasy feeling, Mitzi agreed to help. At that time, she couldn't fully comprehend the potential danger posed by the adult man, and her parents had always taught her to help others. As soon as Mitzi reached for the tape, the perpetrator shoved her inside, covered her mouth with his hand, and slammed the door shut. Mitzi tried to scream, but it was too late. The kidnapper drove off in an unknown direction, leaving her to gaze out the window in horror. At one point, they passed Mitzi's home, and she saw her relatives preparing to celebrate her birthday. A few minutes later, the kidnapper pulled into a deserted parking lot. He gave Mitzi new clothes, forced her to change, and discarded her old clothing in a nearby trash bin. He also warned Mitzi not to try to escape, claiming he had a gun and that no one ever managed to get away from him. In the next few hours, he drove Mitzi in an unknown direction. At one point, she asked why he had kidnapped her, and the man simply replied that the same had happened to him when he was a child. When it got dark, he parked again and began covering the car windows with some rags. He then pulled out a chain and secured it to Mitzi's leg with a padlock. Then, the perpetrator took out a bottle of alcohol and forced her to take a few sips. Mitzi tried to argue with him, but eventually complied with his demand. After that, the man grabbed a camera and took several pictures of Mitzi, then lay down to sleep right in the car. Mitzi tried to keep her eyes open, afraid of falling asleep. She was thinking how to escape and at one point saw a police car drive the parking lot, but it was far away, and even if Mitzi had screamed, the officers would never have been able to hear her. The next day, the perpetrator continued driving her around the city. He made her sit on the floor of the car and covered her with sheets to hide her from view. At one point, he stopped and got out for a few minutes. Mitzi tried to free her leg from the chain, but quickly realized it was impossible. She also found a nail file and attempted to unlock the padlock, but it didn't work. When the perpetrator returned to the car and drove away, he claimed he had stopped by her parents' house. The kidnapper pretended to be a concerned citizen and asked for flyers to distribute around town. Mitzi was shocked and overwhelmed. She had been so close to home, yet still remained in captivity. Throughout the next few hours, the perpetrator stopped several times, getting in and out of the car. In the evening, he drove out of town and parked in a deserted area, where he sexually assaulted his victim. After that, the man fell asleep, leaving Mitzi in a state of shock. The next morning, he drove off again, making several stops along the way, mainly to buy cigarettes and alcohol. At one point, when he returned to the car and leaned into the cabin, something fell out of his pocket. He told Mitzi not to look there and left again, but the girl didn't listen to him. She glanced down and saw a large bunch of keys. Mitzi quickly realized that one of them must unlock the padlock on her chain. She was afraid of what the perpetrator might do to her if she disobeyed. But eventually, Mitzi overcame this fear. She grabbed the bunch, picked a key that seemed to fit the lock the best, and attempted to unlock it. To her surprise, it worked. Mitzi freed herself from the chain. Now, only the car door stood between her and freedom. Mitzi opened the window and tried to climb out through it, but she encountered another problem. She was so exhausted that she could barely move her legs. Gathering all her strength, she managed to lift herself and leap out of the car. As she crawled around it, she spotted her kidnapper, who immediately noticed her. The man began shouting for her to come back, but Mitzi had no intention of giving up. With her last ounce of energy, she ran in the opposite direction. The perpetrator chased after her while Mitzi tried to flag down passing cars for help. She waved and screamed, but they all drove past. Despite this, Mitzi kept moving toward her freedom. She had no doubt that if she stopped for even a second, the perpetrator would catch up and harm her. Everything happened very quickly, but for Mitzi, this moment stretched on forever. Eventually, she spotted a van, ran towards it, and jumped right in front of it. The driver quickly stopped and Mitzi climbed into the cabin. She was shocked, dehydrated, and hungry, but her life was no longer in danger. At the hospital, doctors provided her with the necessary assistance, and soon her entire family arrived to reunite with her. Mitzi's miraculous rescue instantly became the main news story in the city. When she was brought home, thousands of people gathered on her street. They applauded her and shouted birthday greetings, which she had missed. Meanwhile, the police were hunting down the kidnapper, whose whereabouts remained unknown. When they showed his photo to Mitzi's mother, she realized she had actually seen him twice. The first time was before her daughter's abduction, when he stood on their street and looked towards their house. The second time was the day after Mitzi's disappearance, when the perpetrator came to her home and asked for flyers. The search for Curtis continued until late evening. Police set up surveillance at all known places he frequented, and eventually it paid off. He came to a trailer park and was apprehended without resistance. Curtis was booked in jail, awaiting trial, and detectives began investigating his possible connections to other crimes. The man himself told Mitzi she wasn't his first victim and no one had managed to escape him. Investigators simply couldn't imagine this being his first crime of its kind. All his careful and likely premeditated actions suggested he had significant experience in committing such atrocities. It's worth mentioning that Curtis had been previously imprisoned for kidnapping a woman in 1991. He was released in November 1999, and now the police were confident that after his release, he had killed at least one girl, 7-year-old Ziana Fairchild, but we'll get back to that shortly. There was also no doubt that he intended to kill Mitzi. Moreover, one specific fact directly indicated that it was supposed to happen on the day of her escape. Police learned why Curtis had stopped in the industrial area. He used to work there at one of the companies, and that day he visited his former colleagues. He had asked them for a large bag, and detectives immediately realized he planned to dispose of a body in it. After Curtis's arrest, Mitzi struggled to recover for a long time. However, she soon learned that the police were suspecting him of kidnapping Ziana, which made her even more uneasy. While Mitzi was glad she managed to escape, she also worried about the fate of this 7-year-old girl. More than 8 months have passed since her disappearance, and there was no news about Ziana's fate. Mitzi wanted to help find her, so just days after her own rescue, she participated in a search operation along with other volunteers. Unfortunately, they couldn't find any new leads on Ziana's possible whereabouts. This continued until January 2001, when a human skull was found in the mountains near the city of Santa Cruz. Forensic analysis showed it belonged to Ziana, and she was officially declared dead. Mitzi took this news very hard, but ahead of her was another challenge: the trial. It began in April of the same year. Mitzi had to testify before the full courtroom and recount in every detail what Curtis had done to her. He was also present there, but despite all of this, Mitzi managed to fulfill her task. In the end, Curtis was sentenced to 251 years in prison, but that wasn't the end of his story. Detectives repeatedly visited him in jail and asked him questions about his possible involvement in other crimes. At one point, they learned that Curtis had confessed to a fellow inmate about kidnapping and killing 8 other girls. The inmate agreed to cooperate with the police and repeated Curtis' words in detail. But Curtis himself wasn't ready to reveal all his secrets. He didn't deny anything, but tried to negotiate various privileges for himself, speaking with detectives in riddles. Eventually, the man hinted that he had indeed murdered Ziana Fairchild and that he had killed at least 13 other girls and women. It wasn't until 2005 that he gave full confession in Ziana's murder, and for that, he received an additional 50-year sentence. As for Mitzi, her challenges didn't end with Curtis' trial. Just a few weeks after her rescue, she returned to school, where she faced bullying from other children. They called her the kidnapped girl, said she should have died instead of being saved, and generally behaved extremely inappropriately. As a result, her school years became a heavy burden for her, and along with the tragedy she had experienced, it didn't help in her recovery process. Mitzi also repeatedly joined the searches for other missing children, but more often than not, it ended with the discovery of their bodies. Each time, she felt this tragedy as if it were her own, and ultimately, she couldn't cope with this pressure anymore. Alcohol became her only way to cope with the stress, and with each passing day, Mitzi turned to it more and more frequently. Eventually, she stopped seeing even the slightest chance of returning to a normal life. But one day, everything changed. Mitzi was involved in a serious car accident after a party with friends. She broke her neck, arm, and spent 2 weeks in a coma. When she woke up, doctors informed her that she is pregnant and would have a daughter. This news turned her life upside down, and Mitzi found the strength to change it for the better once again. She decided to dedicate all her time, not only to her daughter, but also to other children who became victims of various crimes. She founded a non-profit organization that continues to provide assistance to those in need to this day. As for Curtis, he died of illness in February 2007, just 6 years after being sentenced. The only reason the detectives regretted it was the fact that they had not managed to obtain full confessions from him regarding other cases he was suspected of. Although they still haven't been solved, the police continue to consider his involvement highly probable. It is worth mentioning that Curtis had a son who followed in his father's footsteps. He was convicted of murder, and in 2019, his own life ended in prison. Vincent Moore was born March 3, 2015 to Michelle Mendez and Gary Moore. On June 5, 2015, Michelle dropped off 3-month-old Vincent and his 2-year-old brother at their father Gary's home for visitation. Gary took both children to Texas sometime in mid to late June, and they stayed there until July 9th before he returned to Wichita, Kansas. During this time, Michelle made repeated attempts to get in touch with Gary and see the children, but she was unable to reach them, so at the end of the month, she notified police. Vincent was last seen with Gary in the early morning hours of July 11, 2015, leaving his house near South Hydraulic Avenue and Tulsa Street in Wichita, Kansas. Gary was carrying a blue and black floral print diaper bag. Gary was arrested at a traffic stop in Wichita on July 29th, 18 days after Vincent was last seen. He was arrested and jailed on unrelated warrants for probation violations and failure to appear in court. When he was arrested, he had Vincent's 2-year-old brother with him, but not Vincent. Gary claimed he gave Vincent back to Michelle when he returned from Texas, but she says that is not true and she doesn't know where her son is. Michelle would pass a polygraph test backing up her story. Soon after his disappearance, police searched along railroad tracks in a wooded area near the Wichita suburb of Derby, Kansas, but turned up empty-handed. In 2014, before Vincent was born, Gary was sentenced to probation for misdemeanor battery on Michelle. He was ordered to pay court cost, report to a probation officer, wear a GPS tracking device on his ankle, and have no contact with Michelle. Despite all this, Michelle and him would marry in February 2015. After Vincent went missing, Gary was sentenced to a year in jail for violating his probation by failing to pay his court cost. Also, before he traveled to Texas, he had cut off the GPS tracking device on his ankle, which led to an additional charge. In May 2016, He would plead guilty to this charge for tampering with electronic monitoring equipment and was sentenced to additional time in prison. According to court documents, Michelle was concerned for the safety of their children when they were in Gary's care. She filed for a protective order on June 18th, 2 weeks after she last saw the boys. In her application, she wrote that Gary had never intentionally hurt Vincent and his brother, but stated Gary was rougher than he intends to be, and that he tried to use the children to control her. She said she thought it was only a matter of time before he heard them. In August 2015, Kansas Department of Child Protective Services removed Vincent's brother from Michelle's custody and placed him in foster care. At a hearing held in October, DCF officials said there was clear and convincing evidence that Vincent is deceased. Vincent has since been declared legally dead. However, Gary's family has stated they believe Vincent is still alive. Gary states that he believes Michelle stashed him somewhere and he hopes that he is still alive. As of today, no one has been arrested in connection with baby Vincent's disappearance and his case remains unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.